Right.
Ashley, you want to go?
We'll get going. I declare open this public hearing of the Select Committee on Nuclear Energy for the inquiry into nuclear power generation in Australia. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land in which we meet and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Also like to acknowledge the cultures of any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander peoples present with us today. This hearing will be broadcast on the Parliament's website, and the proof and official transcripts of the proceedings will be published on the committee's webpage. I now welcome Dr. Iron and Mr. Grant to give evidence today. For the Hansard record, would you please state your name and capacity which you appear before the committee?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before you. My name is Ian Grant, and I appear before you as an independent consultant.
Excellent.
Good morning. My name is Robert Young, and I appear as in front of you as an independent consultant as well.
Thank you. This hearing is a legal proceeding of the Parliament. The giving of false or misleading evidence is a serious matter and may be regarded as contempt of Parliament. The evidence given today will be recorded by Hansard and attracts parliamentary privilege. Witnesses given evidence from overseas should be aware that whilst they are entitled to the protections of parliamentary privilege in Australia with respect to the evidence they give, these protections may not extend to another country. Before I invite you to make a brief opening statement and then we proceed to discussions, would you please state if you're a current or former member of a political party or a union or an investor in the renewable or nuclear industries?
I am not a member of a political party, a union or an investor.
Similarly, I'm not a member of a political party, union or investor.
Thank you. I now invite you to both make a brief opening statement before we proceed to questions.
Thank you, Chair. I propose to introduce myself briefly and let Dr. Ian do similarly, and then I'll make a brief statement summarising our written submission. I, in my role as a consultant, have long experience, international experience in nuclear engineering regulation, 49 years in fact. In my current role, among other clients, I have chaired the working group of the International Atomic Energy Agency, advising on the services that it offers to countries that are embarking on new nuclear power programs. I spent 9 years between 2009 and 2018 in the United Arab Emirates, where I helped to establish and lead the brand new regulatory organisation there, first as the Director of Nuclear Safety and later as the Deputy Head of the organisation, overseeing the licensing, construction and commissioning of the UAE's first nuclear power plant recently completed at Baraka on the Arabian Gulf Coast. Before I moved to the UAE, I spent 20 years with the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission here in Ottawa, where I held senior leadership roles responsible for the safety assessment and licensing of Canada's fleet of 19 operating power plants. In the more distant past, I worked in nuclear design and manufacture with Atomic Energy of Canada Limited and with Babcock & Wilcox in the United Kingdom. Thank you. I'll leave that there. And Dr. Ian, please.
Yes, I have over 30 years of experience in nuclear engineering with emphasis in safety and licensing. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in Power Engineering from University Polytechnic of Bucharest and master's and doctoral degrees in nuclear engineering from University of Missouri, Columbia in the US. I'm a professional engineer licensed in Ontario, and I also hold a project manager professional certification. Since 2016, I have been providing consultancy support on the safety and licensing for various SMR-related projects. In recent years, I have been participating in IAEA consultancy and technical meetings on various subjects, mostly related to safety of nuclear power plants. Prior to 2016, I have worked for almost 15 years with Atomic Energy of Canada Limited, AECL, and its successor, Candu Energy. While at AECL, most of my work was on safety and licensing for new nuclear reactor designs. I have interacted and continue to interact with Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and I also have interacted with the US NRC and UK ONR on new reactor designs pre-licensing projects. I started my career performing safety analysis in Romania during the construction completion and commissioning of Romania's first nuclear power plant. Thank you. Ian, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Ian. So I'll now just give a brief summary of a few sentences of our written submission. I'll start by saying that based on our experience, we submit that nuclear energy would be a sound choice for Australia's energy mix. Australia has 70 years of experience with nuclear science and technology, with its Opal reactor and the high-fire reactor before it. And the country has established a strong legal and regulatory framework for nuclear and the institutional capability to provide effective safety oversight. The regulatory body, AUSParliamentLive, is well regarded in the international community, and peer reviews show that its regulatory framework aligns with best international practice. We consider that AUSParliamentLive's existing non-prescriptive regulatory framework, supported by IAEA safety standards, is readily adaptable to licensing and oversight of one or more nuclear power plants based on proven reactor technology. We therefore submit that it would be feasible for AUSParliamentLive to be ready to review and initiate review of a formal construction license application in less than 3 years from the date of a policy announcement to proceed with the programme. Considering the timeline that Australia previously achieved in developing OPAL, as well as the schedules for similar projects in other countries, nuclear power plant based on proven designs, in our opinion, could be operational within 10 to 12 years of a government policy decision to proceed. I'll end there, Chair, and we are ready to respond to questions that you wish to put to us. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start off with the Deputy Chair.
Well, thanks very much, Chair. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time, and I just want to acknowledge your experience. Appreciate getting your input to this. I might start with you, Mr. Grant, if I can. Noting your experience, including with the UAE's program, and I understand you led the new regulatory body in the UAE. I wonder if you can just provide some commentary on the deployment of nuclear in the UAE, which was, like Australia would be, a new entrant. And in making those comments, any reflections on Australia's position relative to where UAE was?
Certainly. The UAE's nuclear program is regarded by many around the world as a model project. It's been called the gold standard because it has successfully moved from policy considerations in 2008 to first nuclear electricity on the grid in 2020. And there are now 4 units operating at Braca that supply 25% of the country's generating capacity with reliable, clean nuclear energy. And UAE achieved this through, in my view, clear policy leadership of the government and a well-organised and managed programme. It chose established reactor technology, as you know, probably from the Koreans, who had long experience in constructing similar reactor designs in their own country. And the Koreans were able to come to the UAE, establish their workforce under their prime contractor, and work with local labour and suppliers, and as well as their domestic supply to build the plants. Now, I would say that the UAE started from absolute scratch. There was only one person in the country that had any nuclear qualifications. That was the ambassador, the permanent representative of the IAEA. I was among the first dozen people in the regulatory organisation, and we began with a blank sheet of paper and built the organisation from that basis. I would say, comparatively, Australia is in a far stronger position. You have an existing regulatory body, you have a legal framework, a regulatory framework, staff who are familiar with regulating radiation sources and nuclear reactors, and a base of experience that would serve you well in the event that you decided to proceed with such a programme.
One of the comments that has come my way when I have referenced the UAE is its different system of government. Indeed, in one of the interviews I did on national television with our ABC in Australia, our national broadcaster, the 7:30 report, the person interviewing me, Sarah Ferguson, said that the UAE is, and I'm going to quote here, is not a country where people can object to a nuclear reactor in their constituency. Given your experience, I wonder if you could just make some comments on that assumption, whether it's accurate or not, and how the UAE dealt with any concerns of its constituencies.
Well, what I would say is that let me first of all say that I'm not a citizen of the UAE and I don't speak for the country, but from my experience of 9 years in the country, I would say that the population I met and the people I'm still in touch with exhibited a lot of trust in the decisions of the leadership. But the UAE also made a policy decision very early in the programme. In fact, it published a policy that I don't recommend to you as an example. I have a cover page here in the colours of the UAE flag, and it's available on the internet for you to read. The very first policy goal was complete operational transparency, and by that the government meant by the policy transparency with other partners and nations, but also to engage and makes commitments in that policy to engage with local communities to understand their concerns and issues and to build trust in the project that was being put forward. And I have vivid memories of, as part of the regulatory body, visiting towns and villages in the desert around the plant site, meeting with local people, often with the benefit of the translator, although many spoke English, to explain the nature of the project, to hear their concerns. I remember many were concerned by the marine life around the facility. They seemed to view the sea as a resource and a source of life. And we were open and transparent and responded to questions. That policy has been carried through into the current nuclear law in the UAE, which requires the regulatory body to post information on licenses and other matters on its website and to keep the public continually informed and engaged. So I would say that the UAE meets a high standard of public engagement and trust in this regard.
Would that also be just the case with meeting the IAEA's requirements from safety, from regulatory perspective and so forth?
Let me make sure I understand your question. You're asking, did the UAE also comply with IAEA requirements?
Yeah, so if I can be candid, what is sometimes implied in this debate is the UAE may have cut corners.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. The UAE implemented as part of the organisation. I was responsible for developing regulations. We based our regulations on the IAEA standards for the power reactors and implemented a rigorous regulatory programme of licensing and inspection. The UAE regulatory framework was subject to numerous peer reviews by the IAEA, in which international reviewers came to review the work that was being done and the standards that were being applied. And these reports are available to you through public websites to read. And I would say that generally speaking, of course there are points raised in any such peer review, but the UAE was found to comply with IAEA standards.
I'm not sure if this is a question just for you, but Doctor, maybe you also, so either or both. We have heard conflicting evidence about the timeline for Australia to establish the regulatory regime for governing a nuclear power program with the coalition side of politics proposing an expansion of ARPANZA, which I'm gathering you're familiar with, given your submission.
Final question, Deputy Chair.
I'm sorry, Chair.
Final question, Deputy Chair.
Final question, no problem. So we've heard on one hand from one of the departments that it could take 1 to 2 years, but we've also heard from one person representing the Australian Energy Regulator saying it could take 8 to 10 years. In your submission, I think you were saying it could take less than 3. Can you maybe just expand on this issue so that the committee's clear based on your lived experience as to the likely timeline you think also reflecting on your knowledge of the Australian AUSParliamentLive framework.
I'll start, Robert. If you wish to add, please feel free. Yes, we have indicated in the submission that we believe that the regulatory body could be ready to receive a construction licence in less than 3 years. In the UEE, that timeline was exceeded by quite a margin. The UEE policy was published in April 2008, and we received our first construction licence at the end of 2010, a little more than 2 years away. And in that time, the regulatory body had pulled itself together from scratch, as I said, from scratch, developed, recruited experts, placed contracts for technical support, and had organised its internal affairs to be ready to review that construction licence. And Arpanza is in a much better position. It has in place a legal framework, it has in place regulations that do not, in our view, need to be changed. Really, the only requirement would be to adopt the relevant IAEA standards which exist today in place of the standards that are used for the research reactor. And maybe, Dr. Ian, you would say a little more about the nature of the difference between the standards for the research reactor and the power reactor.
Yes, I'll go a little bit in more detail. So on specific item, AUSParlimentLive already is using SSR3, which is a safety standard for research reactors, in its oversight of the OPAL reactor. So I looked a little bit of the differences between that standard and the power reactor standards for design, for operation, and for siting. The comparison between that SSR3 and the siting standard for large nuclear power plants, they are almost the same. So that's absolutely clear that AUSParlimentLive can use the same standard for power reactors as it has used the SSR for research reactor for siting. For design, I found that about 90% overlap between the requirements for large nuclear power plants and the standard that AUSParlimentLive already uses for OPAL. The difference is there, the slight difference is about 5–10%, I would say, comes from the nature of the large power plants, which is features related to multiple units on one site. That's more or less the case in many parts of the world. Steam supply system, feed water system, turbine generator, which are, again, they are specific to power reactors. Other differences in interaction between the electrical power grid and the nuclear power plant itself. So these are I would say, small differences between the standards. In terms of operation standard, the differences between the two, it's also 5–10%, and the differences come from, for example, in nuclear power plants, the standard includes additional requirements for long-term operation, basically for refurbishment or life extension, which for the research reactor, that it's not reflected in the research reactor standard. Also, accident management program, it's a little bit more elaborated for nuclear power plants, although the research reactor have emergency planning as well. And some specifics, and probably in chemistry, and being that if it's a light water or a heavy water reactor, shouldn't be a big difference between OPAL and large water cooled reactor from the chemistry point of view. I just gave you a few examples where it gave us additional confidence that, yeah, by adopting the IAEA standards, it's not a big step.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen, for your time this morning. Look, my understanding, just following on where you were going, the OPAL research reactor had an impressive licensing process, including the timeline. My understanding, but would love for you to confirm or correct this, construction licence was issued in less than 3 years, and the operating licence issued about 4 years later. Do you think the success of licensing the OPAL reactor would apply to a new nuclear power plant built in Australia?
I think it gives confidence in licensing a new power reactor in Australia, but it's not the only example. I point to the experience in the UAE, where the construction license was reviewed, a very full and complete construction license, given the maturity of the design, was reviewed in 18 months, and the construction license issued, the first license issued in 2012.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you. And look, given what you've seen and your experience, do you have a view on what's a realistic timeline for nuclear power to be available in Australia after you make the decision you want to do this?
Yeah. I take your point, and I also take my cue from the IAEA milestones guidance, which sets out the governance framework for implementing new nuclear programs, and that typically refers to the beginning of implementation as the time when the government makes a policy decision to proceed. And from that point, I think it's reasonable to say 10 years, maybe a little longer, maybe 12, from the time of a policy decision to the generation of first nuclear electricity on the grid.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to move to talent. Now, while we have a research reactor, while Australia's recently announced a nuclear submarine program, our universities are starting to adjust. But, you know, we may need to look overseas. Can you just comment on your views on how Australia would need to source talent to staff a nuclear energy program?
Yes, it's a good point, and developing human resources is a long-term endeavour. I think there are several strategies available to Australia to develop human resources. I'm thinking particularly the regulatory body, but this also applies to, no doubt, the operating organisation. First of all, in their Panzer, there are already experienced people in the regulatory organisation that could, I'm sure, assist in leading a new project. There is also the prospect of recruiting from abroad. Many people see Australia, as they did the UAE, as a place where they like to live and work. And I'm sure that if a new nuclear program was announced in Australia, that there would be experts from abroad who would potentially be available to be recruited into the respective organisations. And lastly, I'm sure that such an announcement would also attract the interest of Australians, particularly young Australians who are entering universities and colleges. There are already, as you've noticed, some developments in this area connected with the AUKUS program, and building on that momentum, I'm sure that there will be people with skills and knowledge coming available, not immediately, but to join the program as the power plants were to go into service.
And could you tell us just on the talent side a little bit more about countries like, I don't know whether it's the UAE or South Korea, how they source talent to sort of scale up a nuclear program so quickly? Are you...
The UAE used people like me, expats, in the initial years of the program. The regulatory body and the operating organisation were Emirati-led at the board or senior executive level, but in an senior operational level, they hired and were able to hire quite a number of experienced staff from other countries. There was a real mix there. They had the advantages, including being able to offer competitive salaries, but also English was the language spoken in the project. Abu Dhabi was an open economy. There was no restrictions on recruiting people. The other businesses run in the same fashion. It was a model they were used to employing. But as I said, I think that foreign recruitment is a possibility in Australia. And the second part of the policy was the backfill by development of local talent and building that local talent through education and training programs.
And just knowing what you know about the UAE and what you know about Australia, do you believe we'll have any problems in recruiting or finding talent, given your experience in other jurisdictions?
I don't anticipate there being significant issues. I should mention, forgive me, I forgot to add, one of the other resources and strategies that the UAE used was to recruit organisations, consulting organisations, who provide services to regulatory bodies or to owner-operators in other countries, to provide initial support. And that was really quite an important part of the early years strategy. We relied to quite a degree on expert and experienced consulting companies. And I think that they would be available on a commercial basis to Australia as they were to the UAE.
If I may add an example, which is quite old now, 30 some years from my beginning of my career in Romania, the Romanian regulator has had a bilateral agreement with the CNSE, and there were frequently staff from CNSE assigned on various periods of time at CENECAN, at the Romanian regulator. Similarly, the operator, Romanian operator and design organization, have had people coming in from the Atomic Energy of Canada, the designer of the nuclear power plant, coming and supporting during regular activities like preparation of the final safety analysis report, which, by the way, there was a version in English and we had to translate and redo the safety analysis ourselves.
That's me.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Dr. Ryan?
Thank you both very much for your time. So my understanding is that both of you have operators paid consultants to the UAE on its nuclear program in that country. Is that correct?
I was an employee of the UAE federal government for 9 years.
The federal government of
the UAE.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And you, Mr. Iron, or Professor Iron, Dr. Iron?
I haven't been involved in the UAE project.
Okay. I think that one of the concerns about the potential for construction of a nuclear program here as opposed to UAE is the industrial relations landscape in this country as opposed to that in the UAE and the very different work relations between administrators and with the workforce in the two countries potentially. Mr. Grant, were you involved in the supervision of the workforce working on the construction of the Baraka plant at all?
I was not involved directly in the supervision of the workforce. That was the responsibility of the owner-operator and the prime contractor, the Korean prime contractor working on the site. As a member of the regulatory body, we had oversight and insight into the safety practices at the site, in collaboration with the local occupational safety and health agency in Abu Dhabi, but we were not responsible for day-to-day supervision.
Have you ever worked in Australia and within the industrial relations work landscape in this country?
I have not.
Would you agree that the industrial relations landscape are very different in the two nations, and that the speed of construction potential speed of construction of any nuclear program might well reflect differences in the industrial relations landscape in the two countries?
Knowing so as little as I do about the Australian labour situation, it's hard for me to comment, but I don't see that it's necessarily the case that there would be a difference in the ability to carry out large projects in Australia compared to the UAE.
Okay, because we have a highly unionised workforce in Australia with very strict regulations around workplace OH&S and the workplace conditions, whereas my understanding is that in the UAE the workforce is 90% bonded and international workforce for whom expectations and work conditions are very different from those of Australia.
Granted, and yet I would say that the construction work at Baraka proceeded under a formal health and safety programme with oversight from the local regulator, and there of course were some accidents that we were aware of, but it was regulated and overseen by the relevant parties in Abu Dhabi. I think that the safety standards that were achieved were high for the construction workforce.
Did the construction workforce have any independent representation other than that from the UAE government in the reviews by the regulator?
I have to say that the construction workforce did not have a representation in front of the regulator. As the nuclear regulator, we did not regulate the construction workforce.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Ryan. Ms. Mascarenas.
Sorry, I'm just getting the technology to work. Hi, Zanita, over here. Dr. Grant, one of the things that you just said, you were talking about the standards associated with the construction workforce. And so one of the things that we see here in Australia is that there's an increased incident rate for the construction workforce. And so of incidents, and because it's a higher, I guess, like you've got steady state versus construction commissioning, and so there's kind of like not day-to-day tasks that are repetitive compared to an operational plant. So when you said high standards for the construction workforce, can you talk, or like the standards for the construction workforce, can you talk about that in a bit more detail?
The construction managers, the prime contractor and the owner-operator, ENEC, worked hard to instill a safety culture at the work site. I mean, I remember, it seems almost trivial, but supervisors admonishing workers because they didn't hold onto the handrail walking down stairs on the construction site. There would be stairs on scaffolding, and workers would run down the stairs, and they'd stop and say, no, you are to hold onto the handrail because that is a safety practice. They were equipped with safety equipment. One of the hazards of building the plant in the desert was high temperatures. The workers were allocated short shifts, very short shifts of a couple of hours with breaks, with water, with jackets to protect their and enable them to work in these conditions. They worked hard, but they were working under well-managed and tightly controlled conditions.
The other thing that you also talked about was community consultation. Did the UAE have a 2 to 3 year consultation period with the community?
In my memory, I can't recall exactly how long, but we certainly spent in the early years of the programme, maybe the first 2 or 3 years of the programme, quite a bit of time travelling the length and breadth of the country. It's not very big, but visiting all parts of the country, but particularly around the site, visiting towns and villages and engaging in town hall type meetings with the local community. We also did things like put regulations out for comment by locals, as well as by official agencies. And so there was a continued effort. The community consultation engagement didn't stop after construction started. There's a continuing effort to engage with the local community and provide information, understand their concerns by both the operator and the regulatory body.
And are there many independent NGOs in the UAE?
I'd have to say no. There were not many non-governmental organisations who intervened in the UAE with, say, contrary opinions. We did receive some comments from international NGOs on things like regulations, which we put out for open comment.
I've spent some time in Abu Dhabi, and you were talking about time when you spent time in communities. Did you have the opportunity to interact and communicate with women to get that feedback?
Yes. Many of the professional staff at the regulatory body were women, in fact. And of the people who reported to me as the deputy head, 5 directors, 3 of them were women, 2 men. And yes, they were very, very open and vocal in the community. I remember a high school teacher physics teacher who very much wanted to get me into her class to inform her students about what was happening. I never made it there. I feel sorry about that, but she was quite articulate.
One of the bits of legislation that we've been working on in Australia is around the Modern Slavery Act, and to make sure that things that happen in Australia don't have modern slavery associated with it. Do you have a sense of whether unfair work conditions were used during the project?
As I said, in my observation and experience, the workforce at Abu Dhabi, there were nearly 17,000 people on the site at peak. We used to sort of joke to the construction manager. He wasn't a construction manager, he was a boss, he was the mayor of a small city. They had medical centres, recreational facilities, restaurants, cafeterias and accommodation on the site. And they worked under strict standards of health and safety with equipment and supervision that enabled the work to be carried out safely. I believe that the workforce were, in that regard, well cared for.
And final question, the size of Lucas Heights versus the UAE reactor, can you give us a comparison of like the actual numbers, but maybe a fruit comparison of like, you know, maybe a pea versus an orange or a watermelon?
I don't know, Dr.
And this
Ian,
is my final question.
would you like to try that, Dr. Ian? I think perhaps also the safety comparison might be relevant, like what is the relative risk of...
If you can start with numbers first, that would be great, because like, yeah, a medical nuclear reactor versus a power reactor is significantly different.
So I'm not familiar, unfortunately, too much with the Opal reactor, but I've spent a year and a half at the Missouri University Research Reactor, which is a 10 megawatt. If I remember well, that was about 10 years ago or more, actually 20 some years ago. A research facility is fairly small in terms of footprint. Small, it could be, I don't know, 100 meters by 50 meters or something like that. A power reactor, depending on how big it is, to some extent, it's not quite a direct comparison, but depending on how big it is, a 1,000 megawatt reactor, it takes a much larger footprint if that's what you're looking for. And also a much larger exclusion area, which means the distance between the building of the reactor to the fence where you have guards and so on, and nobody can come in. So in terms of footprint, definitely there is a big difference. In terms of safety, I mentioned already there are strict standards. Either if you use the standard for research reactor or for power reactors, they are the same safety standards, the same safety expectations. You shall not harm people, you shall not harm environment, you shall not harm society in general. So, and it doesn't matter the size or the power of the reactor.
Thank you. Dr. Molino.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much. And thanks to both of you for attending today to give evidence. I just wanted to follow up on some of the questioning from Dr. Ryan and Ms. Mascarenas. They've each explored different aspects of our system, industrial relations, occupational health and safety, community consultation and so forth, and each of those are important. I suppose I wanted to ask, based upon the fact that each of you have international experience, would you agree that when you look at different countries, there is a range of, you might say, speed with which different countries tend to be able to deliver infrastructure?
I guess in general, that's I'd agree. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, just at a very high level.
Yep.
Yep. And, you know, so for example, we've looked at China, and China can deliver high-speed rail corridors in a way that amazes many other countries. And that's due to many factors, like we can try and drill down into them. We can look at community consultation, we can look at the workforce, we can look at all the different things. But the bottom line is there seems to be a capacity to deliver infrastructure faster there than in many other contexts. And if one was to consider how quickly we'd be able to deliver here, you know, we would want to take that into account to some degree. I suppose I'm just trying to elevate a little when looking at the UAE versus Australia. It's obviously hard for us to compare how quickly nuclear plants can be delivered in each of those countries because we only have data points on one side. But, for example, I was looking at the time it takes to deliver large buildings, skyscrapers. On average, it seems in the UAE, it seems to be much faster there than here on average.
I couldn't comment on that. I haven't had the benefit of your insights.
But if that was the case, do you think that would provide some guidance as to overall infrastructure constraints, which might arise from all sorts of things, like the federal nature of our system in workplace relations, community consultation expectations, environmental constraints? Do you think comparing delivery times across a range of different infrastructure projects might be useful guidance?
I think it'd be useful at a high level. It's certainly true that large infrastructure projects of all sorts, whether they're hydroelectric dams, railways, are subject often to delay and cost escalation, and there's no doubt that nuclear plants are no exception to that fact. But I would say that the keys in the UAE were not some sort of, it wasn't in the air. I would say the keys to rapid progress in the UAE were firstly clear government policy leadership, combined with very effective program management, and most importantly, the selection of a supplier who was already with current experience with a mature supply chain. I've spoken to Korean engineers at the site who sort of arrived metaphorically, at least with wet concrete on their boots and with binders of photographs illustrating what the plant's going to look like in 6 months' time. They were there to do something they knew how to do. They weren't out on a quest. And I think that some of the well-publicised delays that have taken place in plants in Europe have really been due to the fact that they've been started with incomplete designs, temporary construction organisations that put together with no prior experience and rather weak project management. That, to my mind, are the factors that make the difference. And so if Australia decides to pursue the nuclear program, it's very important that you line up those success factors and draw from the lessons that are out there, as you've been doing.
I think good project management practice is obviously something we'd want to build in here, but I'm simply making the observation that if UAE is an environment where, due to a range of reasons, infrastructure in general is delivered much faster, it makes it harder to draw a direct comparison of construction timelines for this type of very complex project. I mean, that would be a caution, wouldn't it?
Final question, Dr. Lena. Thank you.
Fair point. As part of my response, I say it's not a mystery. I think you can articulate the factors that make construction proceed more rapidly in some countries, including the UAE, and try to the extent possible replicate them in your own domestic environment.
Yep. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Chester.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for being available and for your submission. I want to go to some of the questions that the Deputy Chair asked in relation to the regulatory environment. A lot of the debate in Australia so far, if there's a hesitation in the community, it's around issues of cost and safety. So I want to perhaps draw your attention back to the question of safety, and if you'd be happy to comment on just how robust the international regulatory environment is around the safe construction and operation of nuclear power plants. Is it a very robust system? Are you comfortable with it? Are there any issues we should be aware of?
I'll start and let Dr. again add the international environment, the international safety standards that we've referred to several times, the IAEA standards, represent a consensus among IAEA member states, of which Australia is a party, and in fact Australia sits on the IAEA's Commission on Safety Standards. They represent the consensus among experts and accepted international best practice. Together with the technical standards for reactors, there's also guidance for the conduct of regulatory bodies, the sorts of processes and work that they must do to license and oversee safety. These are similarly consensus-based standards, and the peer review system that the IAEA offers to member states provides further assurance that the regulatory bodies in each country that submit to such peer reviews are compliant with the standards. And so I think this is a very robust long-standing and well-understood system.
Of which Australia is a respected and well-regarded participant?
Absolutely. Australia sits, as I mentioned, on the Commission on Safety Standards of the IAEA. It's a participant in what's called the Global Safety Framework of the IAEA. It's a member of the relevant international conventions for safety, and it's been subject to international peer reviews, which has always come up with some recommendations, but globally confirmed that the regulatory framework complies with the current standards.
I'm not sure if your experience allows you to comment on this, but I'll go there anyway. In terms of the debate in Australia, it's being portrayed somewhat, I think, as a bit of a false choice between renewables and nuclear, when our policy in the coalition would be arguing for a balanced approach where the two could coexist. Have you got any reflections on where nuclear and renewables are coexisting successfully as part of an integrated grid?
Well, let me, as we speak from Canada, our half of this virtual conversation is, I checked this morning, 53% powered by Ontario's nuclear plants, with the balance supplied by water, gas and renewables, wind and solar. Although renewables in our grid are a relatively small proportion. Other countries, the UK, for example, has built out wind to quite a considerable extent and has a nuclear program providing base load of about 50% of the current demand, wind supplies about 30%. And in the UK, as I understand their policy, I certainly don't profess to be an expert on it, but as I understand their policy is planning to build more nuclear to add to its low carbon generation. So yes, nuclear and renewables can happily coexist, as these examples show.
My final question, Chair, just in relation to your comment regarding one of the barriers, or one of the most significant barriers, is a question of government policy leadership. If the country, if Australia demonstrated the political will and then proceeded down this pathway, is that to you would then precipitate or demonstrate or lead to, I guess, the international expertise, skills, assisting Australia in going down this pathway? Is that the signal that the community would need to see before you would be seen as being serious in this space?
Yes, I believe that is correct. I think that if Australia were to make a policy decision to proceed with a new nuclear program, there would be, I previously mentioned, both at an individual level, the prospect of experts seeking to join such a program because it's an exciting employment prospect, but also Australia can expect to receive support from the IAEA through its technical cooperation program, which assists with matters such as training, support for development of regulatory framework, and I would expect the possibility of cooperation with other established regulatory bodies, particularly the regulatory body that may have, or regulatory bodies that may have licensed the designs that Australia selects. And this was a big part of the UAE's work, where the bilateral collaboration with the Koreans enabled the UAE to build on the Korean safety assessments. And I'd say this had two benefits. One was we worked with experts already familiar with the technology, enhancing safety, and secondly, it expedited the work that we were doing. So yes, I think that you could expect to see cooperation on a number of levels emerging following such a policy decision.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chester. Mr. Burnell.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, gentlemen, for providing evidence today. I'm just interested to just go to the cost of the Barracar plant. So that was a 5.6 gigawatt plant that cost nearly 50 billion Australian dollars to construct. Is that something that we are likely to experience on a similar cost basis here in Australia, or is it likely to be more to deliver the same power generation output?
I don't think I'm in a position to give you much. With due respect, I don't think I'm in a position to give you evidence on nuclear plant cost. It wasn't a factor that was before the nuclear regulator or concerned with safety and security. Cost was a matter negotiated between the prime contractor and the owner operator. The publicly reported figure I've seen is about 20 billion US for the plant. I'm not sure how that translates into Australian dollars.
Yeah. Mr. Eon, have you got any input on that? No?
No, not on money, please.
Okay. I do want to go to the opposition's policy because in your submission and in the policy document, it talks about SMRs, and the reason why I'm interested about getting your thoughts on this is that I live in one of the states that's been identified for a small modular reactor. So I'm in South Australia, and that site is up north in Port Augusta, but there's also a second site at Mudgee Power Station in Collie, WA. I want to get my head around where is the small modular reactor technology at, and is it realistically deliverable inside of the timeframes that have been put forward today?
Thank you for the question. So, first of all, in the world today, there are many designs being put forward for so-called small modular reactors. The IAEA handbook lists, I think, over 80 such designs. But these are at various levels of technology readiness, something that's really only on paper. Others are much closer to market. And among those that are close to market, I point out in particular Canadian experience. You may know that Canada has recently, in the past few years, issued what it calls an SMR action plan. And there is a plant now being constructed, it's not yet being constructed, there's a plant proposed at an existing nuclear site near Toronto called Darlington, where it's proposed to build 4 units of the General Electric 300 megawatt BWR. My former employer, the CNSC, is currently reviewing, or come to the end of the review of the construction license. It's expected there will be a hearing in February, and all being well, when that hearing is held and the construction license is issued, the Ontario Power Generation will begin construction on the first of the planned 4 units. And when that unit goes into service, it's planned for around 2029, 2030. That will be the first of a kind of the BWRX 300. I'm aware that there are several other parties, both in Canada, and I think Dr. Ian can speak to this, and elsewhere, that are also interested in building a similar type of reactor. And if so, this could quickly become a proven, established design with multiple sites in the next decade or so.
Indeed, the same type of reactor, BWRX 300, is being looked at by the province of Saskatchewan, which is a province that has no power reactors, and so they are going to embark into nuclear power plants with the SMR. Their time frame is to have, I think it's 2035, so a few years after the Darlington in Ontario site will be with the first reactor in operation. They are already planning for 2035 to have a same type of reactor. Also, there is another small modular reactor. There is under a license to prepare site review by the Canadian regulator at Chalk River, which is 2-3 hours from Ottawa in Ontario. That's a high gas temperature reactor. It's a US-based, South African design.
Can I just get some clarification then? So are these two types of reactors, are they currently, have they been demonstrated to deliver power to grids across the world, or, because I just heard, I think it was Mr. Grant, I think, that said that this was a first of a kind?
That's correct. When OPG completes its BWRX 300, this will be the first of a kind operating in the world. It's of a, I would call it an evolutionary design. It's based on design principles that are similar to, but evolved from conventional large power reactors. So it's not a huge leap into the unknown, but it nevertheless is, it will be a proof of concept when it starts up.
The reason why I asked that question is that we heard evidence from Mr. Stephen Wilson a little while back, and he did a report in conjunction with the University of Queensland, and it talked about project management discipline being crucial, and the 10 keys to a successful nuclear projects. And the number one thing that he put down there was choose nth of a kind over first of a kind designs. So I just have concerns that an SMR pathway on a first of a kind potentially leaves a hole in the South Australia WA market if those projects are delayed because there are complications with delivering those types of reactors.
Chair, I must just point out though, if this continues on coalition policy is only next of a kind. After first of a kind is proven, it morphs into next of a kind.
I'm just trying to get some clarification, Deputy Chair.
Well, I agree with your advice. I give you the same advice. Bill, that was key to the UAE's success, I believe, or one of the keys, building an nth-of-a-kind proven technology reactor. General Electric, the vendor in the case we've been discussing, has, with Ontario Power Generation, a very strong lead partner. OPG is an established utility. Ontario Power Generation is an established utility. It has got it's got a balance sheet that will support the project, and construction operational expertise that will assist in building it and operating it. I would expect within the next decade there's going to be nth-of-a-kind Beeler X300s operating to provide a solid basis of construction and operating experience on which Australia could rely if that were to be the case. In fact, the prospect, I don't speak for the CNSC, but there would be the prospect, I assume, of collaborating with the CNSC to work with them on the safety basis and the work that went into examining and reviewing this particular design.
Final question, Mr. Burnell.
So, just based on those comments, then to get to an nth of kind, we're talking probably by 2035, where it's demonstrated that type of reactor is
there should be at least
a guaranteed supply. Sorry.
Yes, that's right. I would expect that the Ontario Power Generation example will have several years of operating experience under its belt by that date.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burnell. Thank you for appearing, guys. I have some questions. So, a Panzer, you think it'll take 3 years or around 3 years to do the regulatory framework that they need to do. And you guys are aware, obviously, that we have a ban federally on nuclear energy. Are you also aware that every state and territory has also a ban in this country?
I've heard that, yes, that's correct.
Yep, okay, so I'm just going on to what the Deputy Chair said earlier about Claire, who's from the AER, and an example that she thinks it'll take 8 to 10 years as a regulatory framework. Here's an example of what she said. When we did the National Energy Customer Framework, that was literally just developing the rules for retail energy market regulation in Australia, and it involved the Commonwealth and the states and the territories. I was in government then. We started it in 2004. It was legislated in 2012. Then the legislation began in 2013. Queensland didn't adopt this until 2014, and Victoria never adopted it. So that was 8 years to get it through with legislation, another year for it to actually happen, and then some states didn't actually take this on board. If there's a current ban from every state and territory, how do we juggle that, and what's the timeframes to get them on board?
Well, we have been speaking about the work required for the regulator to develop its regulatory framework, and we believe that the existing legislative basis in the AUSParliamentLive Act and the AUSParliament's regulations need little amendment in order to be suitable for a nuclear power plant. I confess we have little advice on what it would take in terms of a legislative process to overturn the current ban, and I defer to your insight on that.
No, do you have anything to say on that one, Mr. Iron?
No, I just echo my colleague Ian's words. So it's our assessment is what would it take and how fast would Arkansas get on board for starting to regulate nuclear power plants, and that we said it's up to 3 years, assuming that the political will and everything is in place. So I cannot comment on what it takes to get there.
No worries. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, and thank you both for your time today. If you've been asked to provide any additional information, including questions on notice, please forward it to the Secretariat by Friday the 13th of December. Please note that responses to questions on notice will be published on the website as submissions to the inquiry. You will be sent a copy of the transcript of your evidence to assist you with answering questions taken on notice today, and you'll have the opportunity to request corrections to transcription errors. I would like to thank the witnesses for appearing today, the committee members, the Secretariat, Hansard and Broadcasting for all their hard work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Bye.